we're going to start off with the O&M tip for the day. So we're going to be talking about route planning. So route planning is really important because as we are walking and trying to gain more independence and ways to travel, it's important to plan your routes. During your O&M lessons, typically, as an O&M instructor, I would plan your routes for you and determine some ways to practice your skills accordingly, and what's going to best be able to keep your skills up to date and what's going to help you learn new skills. With that being said, when you're planning a route, it's the same thing as how are you going to use your skills accordingly in the most efficient manner and the safe manner to get to where you need to be. Also, route planning helps you figure out the most cost-effective way to do your route if you are going a long distance. So the number one question to ask is, how do you want to travel? Are you going to be walking? Are you going to be using the metro or wherever you are? What is your public transportation? Are you going to be using Uber or Lyft? Are you going to be using a taxi? I know that's not as popular today as it used to be, but are you going to be calling a taxi? Are you going to be using a friend? So deciding what you're going to be doing in regards to travel and which is the most cost-effective way to get to where you need to be, what's going to use your time most efficiently as well, and then what's the safest route. So we're going to go over some unsafe and safe routes to use when we're walking and what areas are not necessarily the most smart ways to go in regards to traveling by yourself. So the first thing is to know the address. So after you realize how you're going to get to your destination, because you probably have a decent idea of how far it's going to be, looking at the address and where you need to be exactly dropped off is going to be important. So pulling up a digital map or the maps that I believe Sean and Kevin have gone over with you before is going to be really important, because you want to know how you're getting there, what the apps are recommending to you, and then go from there. Now, when we're doing a route, typically as an O&M instructor, I would be training you on the route prior to you actually learning it. So most of the time we would learn it together. But if you were just so happening to have to plan a route by yourself, you would use a map to be able to plan that out and figure out what your application that you may be using is recommending to you. Any questions so far? Okay, awesome. So the next thing is, if you are traveling a far distance and you are going to be using the metro or any sort of access, the train, a bus, where is the closest stop? Do you need to do transfers? Are you going to need to go from bus to train? Are you going to need to go from like an access to the bus? What is the best way? So what are you going to do there? And then what's going to be the weather for the day? I know that sounds silly, but as if we are standing outside waiting for our public transportation system, we need to know what the weather is going to be like for the day prior to us leaving. Because if you're going to be standing outside in weather for a really long time and it's inclement weather, you need to be prepared for that. If it's extremely cold and you have trouble with really cold air and you're standing waiting for the bus, that could raise an issue as well. Or if it's really hot, you need to be prepared with some water. If it's raining, of course, you need a rain jacket, an umbrella. How are you going to do that if you have a cane? How are you going to hold everything, be able to manage and pack up a bag accordingly? So knowing that weather for the day is actually a really important aspect. And I know it's kind of made or break a lot of my routes if it is a gross day out and I had to plan something else. So if it was a really rainy day, pouring rain, thunder, lightning, of course I had to have a backup plan to be able to get to where or what I wanted to do with the person I was working with. So weather is really, really important in that way. The next thing that you're going to do is figure out the times that all your buses and trains and all that are going to be arriving and departing. You need to know what time you need to get there and base it off of how long it takes you to walk from point A to point B. You want to get to the place of arrival and departure, or at least departure, about, I would say, 10 to 15 minutes prior to it departing. You want to be able to get there early just in case. The unfortunate part of that is if you do get there early and it is running late, you are going to be waiting there a little bit longer than normal, but it's better to be safe than sorry and be late for the bus, because you don't know if on your route, if it is something that you're familiar with and you've walked several times, if there's going to be an obstacle. Sometimes there's construction, sometimes there's just things in your way and you could get lost, you could get turned around. So it's really, really important to leave early enough that you'll get to where you need to be, or you plan for at least a 15 to 20 minute buffer in any route planning. So, because you don't know what's going to happen. So the next thing is, how much is it going to, so cost effective, how much is it going to cost to get from point A to point B? What are your options? So when we're looking at our public transportation system and Uber and Lyft, what is the most effective way with your time and your money? So some people may prefer to use Uber and Lyft from where they're from point A to point B. Some people prefer to do a transfer. So are you going to do access and the bus? It is a cheaper, more effective way, but it is going to take you a little bit longer. So how much time do you have? And what are you bringing with you that makes the most sense for your travel? So those are just the basic traveling with public transportation. So we're going to move into kind of more of the walking routes. So the best way to prepare yourself for where you're going to be dropped off is to familiarize yourself with that area. So you're probably going to be pretty typically leaving from your home or work somewhere that you are very familiar with, going to another location that you may not be as familiar with. So kind of walking around, getting a feel for the area that you are going to be stopped at. So in case the driver were to drop you off in a weird location, you're able to figure out where you are based off of landmarks, based off of how the street feels under your cane, where the grass is, whatever the area has to describe to you where you're at, it needs to be familiar to you. So just making sure you spend the time at the location you're going to be able to understand that if you are dropped off in the wrong area, you'll be able to get around. If you do have some sight and you're able to look at a map, you can open up Google Maps or Google Street View, and you'll be able to see what is around and what to expect when you get there. So that is another way to familiarize yourself with the area. Also, calling your O&M instructor to be able to bring you to that area and familiarize yourself and walk you around is going to be really helpful as well. If you are traveling to this location multiple times, it's good to bookmark your location. I don't know if Sean or Kevin have gone over bookmarking a location into your smartphone or any sort of your apps, but that is a really good way to save a location if you need it more than once. Saving an address and the phone number, sometimes you can make it a contact. So you can actually put, this is the location. You can add an address in your contact book of where you need to go. So if you're going to a doctor quite often, you can save that address and their phone number so it's all in one place, so you don't have to constantly keep looking it up. So saving that address, and then you can put notes in there and you can actually type in how you traveled there. So did you use the metro? Did you use the bus? Did you just walk? What did you do? So putting in those notes to be able to remember what you did. So going forward, you'll be able to use that. If you don't have an O&M instructor to be able to help you, or if you're a little bit uncomfortable with the area, you can always call the people that you're going to, whether it be a doctor, the grocery store, and ask them, have you experienced any blind or visually impaired people coming in here that you'll be able to help me get from, or that you have any recommendations for how I would get there most effectively? Or if I were to be dropped off, would you be able to help me if I called you out of the vehicle into the front door? If you are very uncomfortable doing it by yourself, or it's a first time, you can always call ahead and make sure that a staff or any personnel is able to assist you to get into where you need to be. That also goes for grocery shopping. It's good to call ahead to see if there's anyone, especially in a time like having COVID, where sometimes the workers there's a little bit less than normal. So making sure that someone is there to assist you and that they're able to assist you, especially at this time where a lot of close contact and the light amount of people that are in offices at the time, there's still someone there to help you. Again, with notes, it's good to also mark down what you would need to bring typically when you come to those places. So in a contact that you place in your route planning, putting down that you might need a water bottle, like paper towels, napkins, wipes, medicine. How long are you going to be there? Do you need to charge your phone in the middle? Are you going to need a battery pack to be able to charge your phone up? What are you going to need? So putting that in your notes as well. So those are some basic route planning for long distances. The next thing is knowing when you're walking what that's going to look like. So if you're walking on a route, it's really important to know that there are several different routes. There is an L route, a U route, and a Z route, and a straight, like just a straight line I route. So it's important for you to know that different routes are going to require you to travel differently. You may need to cross streets depending on the route. You may need to do stop sign, lighted intersections. So you need to be prepared for what intersection you're coming upon. Is it a stop sign? Is it a four-way stop? Is it a four-way lighted intersection? Is it a T intersection? Do the crosswalks line up properly? Are they straight across, or do you need to go on a diagonal? How is the truncated domes facing the street in order to line myself up? Am I going to be ending up walking out in the middle of the street? Do they have an automated system in the lights that you'll be able to hear chirps or telling you that it's safe to go? Is there a controlled left turn, an uncontrolled left turn? What about the right turning lane? All these little things about walking is really important to know about the area that you're in. Also, the speed limit in the area is really important, because if someone were to be driving and coming up on a stop sign and you're in a 45 mph and you're hearing a car from far away, are you, as an O&M, I would tell you that's unsafe from the moment that you hear a car. But if you are going to go and you feel like you see the car in enough time, are they able to stop in enough time from the speed that they're traveling for you to be able to get across that street? So knowing what the speed of all the cars, and also when you're listening to traffic, knowing where the car is in relation to you and how long it's going to take that car to get to you is really important to know how fast the car's going. So we need to know how many lanes are in the street when we're walking, because that can get really confusing if you hear a ton of cars and you have no idea how many lanes they're at. You need to know that. You need to know how many lanes are stopping at a time, how many lanes are going. Is there 2 turning lanes? Is there 1 turning lane? These are just little details that you don't really think about that are important, but are truly, truly important. Do they have truncated domes? I mean, there's a lot of areas at lighted intersections that don't have truncated domes or don't have any alert system to let you know that, hey, you're coming up on a stop sign, you're coming up on a light. Now, there is regulations that they need to do that now. but there weren't always those regulations. So just making sure that you're fully aware of the crosswalk that you're coming up on. While you're walking, it's also good to keep in mind that your cane skills need to be perfect if you're going in an unfamiliar area. If you're sweeping your cane and there just happens to be construction, how are you going to be able to get around that construction in your way, in the middle of the sidewalk, in the street? Are you going to be able to safely get around it without falling? I mean, not to scare you, but to fall before falling in a ditch or tripping over something, walking in the middle of the street. It's really good to know how to get around and how to avoid those situations. I always recommend people that run into construction that they feel like, are they going out in the middle of the street, is to take the grass, especially if you're in a rural area. This goes for this as well. So if you're walking along and there's no sidewalk and you run into a car, it's always safer to go on the inside of the car into the grassy area than it is to go around the outside of the car into the middle of the street, because you're in a safer area being on the grass than you are in the middle of the street. So if there is construction, I recommend to go towards the grass or in away from the road than it is to go towards the road. Keeping a mental map in your head while you're going around construction is really important, and being mindful of the turns that you're making and the angles that you are making so you don't get completely lost and turned around when you are to avoid an obstacle like that. So I'm going to pause because I see there's a chat. Once upon a time during my keen training as O&M at San Francisco State. Oh, you froze. That's so funny. Yes. So, I mean, it is. I did a lot of training up north prior to coming down here. So a lot of it was outdoors in freezing cold weather and rain. So we had to work with a lot of different elements of weather. Any other questions or comments regarding street crossings and walking along the street, or what you feel is the most, any questions about effectiveness and all that? Any comments on O&M that maybe you've experienced? Any stories that maybe you overcame? Electric, oh my gosh. Yeah, that is, electric cars are the epitome of blind and visual impairments and O&M. Those are a different breed of travel for cars and such, and they're impossible to hear. That's a whole nother lesson for electric cars. So yeah, any other comments, concerns, questions regarding O&M and route travel? I know that was a lot. Nothing. All right. So we're going to take the next about 20 to 30 minutes moving on to some nutrition now. So before I move on, I just want to double check that there are no questions, comments, concerns regarding route planning or travel. Okay, awesome. So today for nutrition, we're going to talk about some ways that you can prevent heart disease. As a lot of us age, heart disease, heart attacks, clogged arteries do become a little bit more of a threat to our well-being, because as time goes on, our bodies age and it doesn't work as well as it should and as well as it normally was. So it's really important to make sure that we are aware of what the risks are with heart disease and how we can properly feed our bodies in order to avoid heart disease or any sort of heart concern, and making sure that we feel our best. So the number one thing that we've really gone over more than anything is the controlling of portion size, making sure that we know how much we're eating and of each and every food group. Don't overload your plate. And if you are to fill up your plate and then 1 second, to give yourself about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes in between first and seconds, so you know that you are actually still hungry, because it takes your body about 20 minutes to really realize how much food it has eaten. So if you are a fast eater and you can eat an entire plate in 5 minutes, your body's not going to register how much it ate for another 15 minutes after that. If you are a heavy eater and you love to eat a lot of food, making sure you eat large portions of the lower calorie nutrient food first, such as fruit and vegetables, and then move on to those higher calorie foods or the carb foods. So load up on those important foods first to make yourself fuller, and then you may actually eat less of the higher calorie foods. So that will really control your portion sizes. In restaurants is going to be the number one thing that this happens at, because restaurants do, for cost effective purposes, load your plate up with the cheaper food. So that's going to be your potatoes, your pastas, and a lot less vegetables. So eating those vegetables and the protein first prior to eating the carb heavy foods. Keeping track of what you are eating and when you're eating it is good as well, to control how much you are eating. So that's just for portion sizes. We've gone over a lot of portion control and marking down what you eat and how much to eat. Now we're going to move on to those vegetables. So eating more vegetables and fruits. They are a good source of vitamins and minerals, as we have talked about. They're also rich in fiber. A lot of foods can actually be made, so carbs and proteins can be made from vegetables and fruits. So they are the most important aspect of eating, is all those fruits and vegetables, because they have the most value of vitamins, minerals, and nutritional value than any other food group out there. Eating more fruits and vegetables, again, can help you cut back on high calorie foods. They can also help prevent cardiovascular disease. So they are the top most up-notch food group out there. I am a huge advocate of just veggies and fruit. Lots and lots of veggies. I love veggies. I recommend them, and I want everyone to eat more veggies in their diet. I always try to figure out a best way to feed my 5-year-old veggies in any way possible. So adding spinach to things, mixing it in without him knowing, adding broccoli. There's just so many different ways that you can try to get those veggies in without really realizing you're eating veggies. So we're going to talk about fruits and vegetables to choose and what's better to eat and what to limit. So some fruits and vegetables that are good to choose are fresh or frozen vegetables and fruits. So getting those fresh or frozen, mainly the frozen, will actually last longer. So you don't have to worry about it rotting or worry about the expiration. If you're in the grocery store worrying about picking out the perfect orange, the perfect pepper, any of that. If it's frozen, it's going to be a lot easier for you to just grab it off the shelf and throw it in the freezer. So if you do struggle with that, doing the frozen is going to be a lot better method. If you are getting the vegetables in a can, making sure that they are lower sodium. And then if you are getting canned fruit, to make sure that it's in juice or water, not in syrup. Some fruits and vegetables to limit, not that you have to cut them out completely, but to limit, are coconut. It is high in sugar, high in calories. It's delicious, but just making sure you limit it. It does have some nutritional value, but making sure that it is limited. Vegetables in creamy sauces. So cheesy vegetables, Alfredo vegetables, any dairy-based creamy milk-based sauce is going to be best to avoid as much as possible with those vegetables. It is okay to have it along with the fried and breaded vegetables like fried eggplant, just making sure that you keep it to a minimum. Then canned fruit, again, with heavy syrup, and then frozen fruit with sugar added. Make sure you get the frozen fruit that does not have any sugar added, and typically they label that as so. So moving on to carbs, the whole grains. So whole grains, as we all know, are a really good source of fiber. they are really good for regulating blood pressure and heart health. I know that a lot of Cheerio boxes are whole grain Cheerio and help prevent cardiovascular disease. So that's how I think a lot of us understand whole grains, as you see it on the Cheerio box. Um, so just making simple substitutions for refined grain products. Geez, talking is an issue today. You can be very adventurous and try different forms of grains as well that not a lot of people have eaten, but there's farro, there is quinoa, and barley. Those are very unique forms of whole grain that a lot of people forget about or don't buy, but they're really good forms of whole grains. So some whole grain products to eat and to kind of eat more than others are going to be your whole wheat flour and your whole wheat bread, high fiber cereal, whole grains, brown rice, barley, buckwheat. We got our whole grains, so whole grain bread, whole grain pasta, whole grain oatmeal. Then you can also do the steel cut or regular oatmeal. For grains to limit or to completely avoid. So we're looking at that white flour. White flour is stripped from a lot of its nutrients to make it that white consistency, along with white bread and pastas, white pasta, all that. Those are stripped from a lot of the nutrients that they have. So if you're going to eat your carbs and get those grains in, making sure that it have that natural color to it and it's not stripped of all that color and the nutrients. Frozen waffles, frozen bread, donuts, biscuits, cakes, pies, buttered popcorn, high crackers, those are going to be the things that you're really going to need to avoid because of how they are made and what's put into them. You don't need to cut, again, like I've said with a lot of things, don't be worried about cutting yourself off completely of these things. It's okay to reward yourself with some of these delicious foods. So, we got those cosmic brownies, and I don't know if a lot of you know what a cosmic brownie is, but it's the packaged brownies that have the little chocolate sprinkles on top, and they are the most delicious brownie in the entire world. I don't know why I'm obsessed with it, and it has been years since I've had one. I have a gluten allergy that I was diagnosed when I was 16, so I haven't had it, and I love them and I miss them. But if you do want these things, have them, enjoy them. It's not a problem. Lady fingers, yodels, devil dogs, whoopie pies, whatever. Enjoy it. Eat it in moderation, but enjoy it. It's okay. So don't think I'm telling you not to have these things. So we're moving on to fats now. So fats are very strongly connected to our arteries and our blood function, our cholesterol levels, all that. So we need to maintain a good flow of blood and avoid any buildup of plaques in the arteries. So the best way to do that is by focusing on the fats to have. So let's talk about saturated fat. It's important to know that you're not supposed to have any more than 5 to 6% of your total daily calories of saturated fats. There is a lot of other low-fat substitutions, but saturated fat and trans fat are going to be the two that are either need to be avoided or keep on the lower end. You can reduce your amount of fats, of saturated and trans fat, by cutting fat off your meat or buying leaner meat, focusing on the seafoods, the chicken, and keeping or getting a lean ground beef or a fillet instead of a steak. Now, if you want that juicy steak, have that juicy steak. Don't be afraid. But if you are eating it, you can cut down by cutting off the edges of fat around the steak. Or if you feel it, if you are chewing it and it's a lot of fat, kindly put it in your napkin and ball up a napkin so you can stop eating it. You can also add less butter and margarine and shortening when you're cooking. So something that I talked about when we're cooking with food, and you can use spray oil instead of putting actual oil in the pot, which is going to reduce the amount of oil that you're cooking with. So some people do say that you can use, it's not a huge alternative form, but you can use a salsa or a low-fat yogurt in foods or on like a baked potato. So it's kind of like a chili cheese baked potato. It does not taste the same, and I promise you it doesn't. But it is, if you are looking for that similar taste, it does give you that. Looking at those reduced fat labels, making sure that if you are grabbing a reduced fat food, that you read the label or scan the label and have it read to you and know what's in it, because you need to know what they're using to still make it taste good and stay together without all those fats in it. So knowing what they're using. Of the way to know that if it does still have trans fat in it is partially hydrogenated. That is really important to avoid. When you are eating fats or reading labels and seeing fats and stuff, some of the stuff that you want to be able to see is monounsaturated fat, which is going to be your olive oils, your coconut oils, or sorry, canola oils, your polyunsaturated fats, which are in fish, avocados, nuts, and seeds, are going to be also good. They can help actually lower your blood cholesterol, but making sure you're still doing in moderation, because no matter what the fat is, it is still high in calories. So just to make a quick little list of fats to choose and fats to limit. So fats to choose: olive oil, canola oil, vegetable and nut oils, margarine, trans fat free, cholesterol lowering margarine. I have never seen it, but I read up on it, and it was the Promise Active or the Smart Balance. Those are what it was, cholesterol lowering margarine. I just kind of considered those margarines, but I learned that. Nuts and seeds and avocados are all other fats that you can use. Fats to limit, you can still use, but to limit: butter, lard, bacon fat, gravy, cream sauce. Non-dairy creamers actually have a lot of fat in them. Hydrogenated margarine and shortening, cocoa butter, and then you can use this, but limiting it, is coconut oil, palm oil, cottonseed, and palm kernel oils. You can still use those, and if you are going to use an oil on the limit list, that's the oil to use. So lower fat proteins is the next thing. But before I move on to that, is there any questions or comments or anything that I need to go over again regarding fats and nutrition and portion controlling grains? I don't see anything. All right, moving on. So we're going to talk about now low fat sources of protein. So when we're talking about proteins, we've always talked about them being really healthy and really good for you. And they are. But if you are on the end of the worrisome heart risk, heart disease, keeping that low fat protein sources. When you're choosing those low fat options, making sure that it's still a good source of protein, because if you are cutting down on your higher fat proteins, you got to make sure you're still replacing all the other things with still a good amount of protein, if that makes sense. I feel like that was worded very weird. So we're looking at a lot of skim milk, skinless chicken breast, also not fried chicken patties. We're looking at some fish with high is a good alternative to high-fat meats because they have omega-3 fatty acids, which can lower blood fats. Blood fats are called triglycerides. The highest amount of omega-3 that you can find is cold water fish like salmon, and then other sources of fat that you want to use, but in moderation when you're cooking these things, because you do have to cook a lot of fish and meat in oil, not on a sprayed pan. So you want to use the flaxseed, walnut, soybean, and canola oil, limiting it, but that's what you use in order to cook the meats. Some ways that you can have vegetables but still have your proteins is legumes like beans, peas, and lentils. They are high source protein, low fat, no cholesterol at all, and great for substitution of meats if you are a vegetarian or a vegan. They do make a lot of burgers now with soy or beans. They also put beets in a lot of burgers to even give them the red consistency that you would get from a regular burger. So that actually help reduce the fat and cholesterol that you have a lot of the time when you eat burgers. And they do offer those burgers in restaurants as well. So for a little list of of proteins to choose from if you are trying to avoid higher fats is a low-fat dairy products, eggs, fish, especially cold water fish like salmon, skinless poultry, legumes, soybeans / tofu, and then lean ground meats. So you want to hit it at about 93% lean and 7% fat or lower. The proteins to limit or avoid are going to be your full fat milk and dairy products, organ meats like livers, fatty and marbled meats. I know they taste wonderful and they're juicy and delicious, but those are going to be the ones that you're going to have to be careful of. Spare ribs, hot dogs, sausages, bacon, and then any fried or breaded meats. Moving on from meats, we're going to go into reducing sodium in your diet. We can eat a lot of sodium in our foods if we're eating a lot of frozen foods, especially right now. What's the best oil for high heat cooking? I use canola oil. It's not as great as vegetable oil, but that, and then you can use peanut oil. I know a lot of people use peanut oil to fry like French fries and oh my gosh, chicken fingers and stuff. So I recommend either canola oil or peanut oil if you don't mind the taste of a little hint of peanut. But that's going to be your best bet, because olive oil is a little bit on the spectrum of lower heat cooking. You can use vegetable oil, but you can always mix vegetable and canola oil together. Have you used non-oil fryers? I haven't yet, but I have seen people use them and make stuff for me, and the stuff is amazing. The non-oil fryers are probably, if you are trying to steer clear of oil completely, use non-oil fryers. They are incredible. Highly recommend. So yes, do that. Even for non-fried foods, putting in like potatoes, if you were to cut up potatoes and just put them in the fryer, they come out to the consistency of French fries as close as you can get. So highly recommend, if you do want and you love your fried food, to add that to your list to limit the amount of oils that you are using. There are different non-oil fryers out there that you need to look at. And if I would recommend more towards like the $60-$70 range if you want it to last long and do the job well. Anything lower isn't going to necessarily do the job perfectly, or it's going to be on the smaller end. So if you are just that wouldn't be bad, but I recommend, if you want it to last long and do the job right, to go up into like the $60 or $70 range. But not saying that the lower, cheaper ones don't work. Just if you want the long-lasting product, that's where you're going to want to get it. Awesome. Any other comments? No. Okay. So moving on to lower sodium in food. So so it's recommended that adults have no more than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. So that's equivalent to about a teaspoon of salt. Most adults typically don't have more than 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day, but those people that are eating a little bit more of the frozen foods or do love salt on their foods to maintain just a teaspoon of salt a day. I know it sounds small, but when you actually look at a teaspoon of salt and start putting it on your food, you'll realize actually how much it is. And reducing the amount of salt that you add to food and while cooking is going to be important in knowing how much knowing how much sodium you are putting on your food on a regular basis. So if you are cooking with it, not to add more salt while you eat it. When you're cooking, to limit the salt, to add it later if you do want it on the food. So knowing when you're adding salt, what has salt, what doesn't on your foods. A lot of frozen foods, a lot of canned foods do have a lot of sodium in it. So knowing how much you're getting from that. Eating fresh foods, again, steering clear of the frozen, eating fresh foods, making your own soups and stews can actually reduce the amount of sodium that you eat. So learning how to cook soup and broth can actually limit your sodium intake. Another way that you can reduce your salt is by condiments and carefully reviewing what those condiments have in them, making sure that they are either reduced sodium versions or they just don't have a lot of sodium to begin with. Some lower salt foods, additive items that you can put on your foods in order to keep the sodium to a minimum: herbs and spices, salt-free seasoning blends, Tony, I always say chaudhries, but people tell me I say it wrong. That has a very, very, very high salt content. It's delicious, but it's very high in salt. Reduce salt canned soups or prepared meals or beans. And then any sort of condiment that is reduced salt, like soy sauce and ketchup, both have very high salt contents in them. Some things to limit: restaurant meals that you come from fast foods and just restaurant meals in general. My husband is a chef and I've seen the way that they cook with salt. It is a lot, and they eat a ton of salt, and it blows my mind how much salt they put in foods. So I always have to tell him to keep cool on the salt when he's making meals for us. Ketchup, mayonnaise, soy sauce, tomato juice or tomato sauce, and then any already prepared foods and frozen dinners. Any questions on that? It doesn't look like it. All right. So last two tips I have for you in regarding heart healthiness is plan ahead. Knowing what foods you're going to eat for the day, knowing which ones to limit. Are you going to be treating yourself for the day? Knowing what that treat is going to be, what nutritional value that treat has, so you know what you have for the rest of the day ahead, so you can properly plan out. So if you need something to do while you're sitting drinking your coffee in the morning, plan out your meal for the day. Turn off the TV and plan out your meal for the rest of the day. It's the same way that you plan your day out, plan your meal out. And then treat yourself. Don't be afraid to occasionally give yourself a candy bar, the potato chips, the French fries, the chicken tenders, the ice creams. Don't be afraid, again, to treat yourself to those things. It is really important to still give your body the things that it wants and it craves, because if you don't, when that stuff comes in front of you and you can't even stop yourself, you're going to overeat it, and it's actually going to hurt you more than help you. So enjoy your food. Don't overdo it, but enjoy what you have, so you can, because a lot of people see food as enemies, and it's not. And it's delicious, and it's fun, and food makes you happy. It makes me happy. So yes, potassium is very important for our health and our heart health. Yes, thank you for that comment. Potassium rich foods. Bananas, of course, and avocados are two highly potassium rich foods. I believe sweet potatoes have a lot of potassium in it. Brussels sprouts, spinach, beetroot, like beets. I believe beets have a really high potassium content in them. I think salmon and like some seafoods like salmon does. Lentils do. I believe those are some of the higher potassium foods. And now that watermelon's in season, I believe that watermelon does too. So for those watermelon lovers out there, watermelon has a lot of potassium in it. But yeah, so those are high potassium foods. Any other questions before I am done for the day?